This week's video is going to be just one video, which is kind of nice. This is a pretty quick, easy build. There's some difficult techniques I use in it, but I still think it's beginner-friendly project. Cutting dados and whatnot is not really that difficult, especially if you have a table saw. So like all cabinet projects, I'm just going to start by cutting down my materials. I'm actually making 3 pieces of furniture for this client. This is the second one, so I actually had some leftover plywood from the project I finished up for them a couple weeks ago, so that's why I'm not cutting down full sheets. These are the rough sizes for my sides, and I still had some face frame material already cut that will go around the edges of this plywood cabinet as well. So all I'm going to do is, you can see I had that face frame. I'm just going to rip about 3/4 of an inch off, and then I could frame out this plywood carcass. I am going to have plans for this build. I'm actually almost done with them. I don't think they're going to be uploaded by the time this video comes out, but they should be uploaded somewhat soon. So then once that was done, I could put the dado stack in my saw. I could realign everything based off of the groove I cut into this face frame, and then I could put my tall fence on there because I'm going to be cutting the groove into the plywood. It's a little bit safer when you have all that vertical support, and then cut that receiving groove on the plywood. The thing about these grooves, and you'll see them throughout the entire project, they're all pretty consistently the same depth, somewhat centered in the middle of the piece, and that is, it doesn't really matter if they're a little off center. The depth, you could adjust the spline based on that. It's more so that you cut them all so they're the same. If you cut that spline on your face frame material, it doesn't match the spline on your plywood, nothing will line up. And then I just ran this through with the sacrificial fence on the table saw to cut that backside rabbet. This is a really small cabinet, so the backer for this is going to only be 1/4 inch ply, so I just put a 1/4 inch rabbet on the backside of all of my panels. This is going to be a little bit different because she had specific heights of shelves that she wanted, so usually at the top I just put a 3/4 inch piece of ply, but we didn't want to waste that dimension because we wanted to get as much inner space out of this as possible. So for this, I'm going to be doing it a little bit different. I left a tongue at the top. You could see it's a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner than what I usually do. It's about 3/8 of an inch at that top of the cabinet. And then the top of this will have a groove that tongue will fit into. So the top is just going to be the top side of the cabinet. There won't be any sort of runners at that top. And then the bottom, pretty easy, 3/4 inch rabbet on the bottom. I showed that there, and that was basically the cuts. So then this is just cutting the bottom piece based on the dimensions. This, I had drawn this out in SketchUp beforehand because this particular customer likes drawings. So I was just working off the computer, which is kind of a double-edged sword. I don't like working on the computer, but for these cabinet builds, all the math is already done, and I took the time to make that drawing, so it just makes life a little bit easier. And then I could cut the backer. I had a little bit of problems with this video with turning on the camera at the right time, so I'd already cut the backer. That was just showing you how I did it. So I'd cut the base and the top. This is the top. I'm going to be putting that groove around all 4 sides because I'm going to be putting a hardwood edge on that top, and that's all I'm doing here. You can see I still had this set up from when I did the sides, so I could just run all of my sides through. And then, like I said, it doesn't really matter where that groove is located. You want to kind of keep it in the center just for structural purposes, but it's really important that every groove that you cut, the material you're putting on the outside, you cut it at the same time, or you could be really good at realigning your surfaces, because that's what's going to matter, these 2 pieces aligning perfectly. So for this top, I didn't have a super thick spline because I had those grooves in there. So you could see I'm only doing about a 1/4 inch edge banding, only coming in about a 1/4 inch from the side. So I marked those grooves on the top. Like I said, they're going to fit over these top tongues I left on the cabinet. And in order to cut these, since this is going to be painted, if you don't feel safe doing this, you could cut a through dado and not worry about it. But because I've done this before. It's easier to just, I have 2 marks on my plywood. I marked little arrows where I need to lower and lift that piece so that that groove won't go all the way through the wood. This is a dado cut technically. It won't go all the way through the wood, so I can lower it with the arrow with that first line, and then my arm's going to get in the way, but when my back line meets the arrow of that back piece of tape, I can lift it up. Same thing on the other side. It's the exact same dado. Lower it and lift it up. I'm only going, I think it was about 3/8 of an inch deep, so I wasn't going super deep on this. And then those are my 2 dados. And because the saw blade is obviously round, it's not going to leave you a square edge. So you just have to remove a little bit of material with a chisel. I was really careful doing this because I'm so close to that edge. And then I just have to take a little piece off the back side of the cabinet because I didn't want the groove to go all the way through the back. And I could glue my main carcass together. So this one was pretty easy. I had the groove in the front for the face frame, the rabbet in the back for the backer, the rabbets on the bottom for that bottom shelf, and then the grooves and the dados on the top for that topper. I'm going to permanently attach this backer. Sometimes on bigger pieces of furniture I'll leave the backer attached with screws just because moving it can be a lot easier if you take that extra weight off, but for something small like this I just glued and attached that backer. So when you put this all together, you're left with a little bit of an edge on some of the plywood, and your splines won't fit in there. So you can see with the saw, I just removed those splines. If you're looking at the drawings show them removed. Do not bother cutting those. Wait till it's all together and just remove that little bit of material once it's all glued together. And I already had all my spline material made. You can see I'm using just regular 1/4 inch plywood for splines. All of my grooves were about a 1/2 inch deep on both pieces, roughly. Like I said, it doesn't really matter if that's super accurate, just as long as they're all consistent. And all I could do was take that inch spline, because it was going to go a 1/2 and a 1/2 into both my pieces, attach it, and then put some brads in there. And it's just a very simple face frame on this, just 3 pieces. So then for the top, you could see I already, like I saw in a previous clip, I already had that groove cut. And like I said, this is really thin. It's only about a 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to cut 1/4 inch splines as well. This is very small material I'm sending through the saw. If you are uncomfortable doing this, I'm going to recommend just using a wider piece so your fingers aren't as close to the blade as mine are getting. But flipping it the way I did, I think is a pretty safe cut. And then to attach all this stuff, I just work my way around the top. You can see I have the miter in the back. I can line it up with the back, mark the front side miter, and then attach this piece, and I'll just work my way around the cabinet that way. So then same process here. You can see just kind of how all that fits together. Like I said, there's a very thin edge. This is going in a particular spot in her home, so it had very specific dimensions as far as final width, height, and depth. So in order to make this top work with the minimal overhang she wanted, that's why I have this thin material. Now, if you aren't comfortable doing this, you could completely skip this step, make your top almost as wide as you want it, and then cover the entire outside with just that glue-on adhesive edge banding. That stuff works as well. I just prefer hardwood. For the legs for this, it was going to be a mid-century modern style, so instead of going about bothering to make these legs because they're angled in 2 dimension as well as not square, you can buy, legs are one of those things that are still pretty inexpensive to buy. It's going to cost less than the lumber to buy to build it, and then you save on labor with not having to make them. So if I remember, I'll try and put a link in the description to the ones I got. She wanted this to be 6 inches off the floor, so that's why I got those ones. It's not a sponsored post or anything like that. They're just the ones I used. I cut the slats that the legs are going to go into because I don't like drilling into end grain of legs. So I'm going to build a whole frame for these legs to sit into, which is going to require an open mortise on the top side of these legs. What you just saw was cutting them on my tenoning jig, but like I said, I built 2 pieces of furniture for her, and I liked the setup I had for the second piece because that tenoning jig was a little precarious and not super accurate. I'm going to show you really quickly how I made this jig. I just found the angle of the legs, which is about 12 degrees, and I just built basically multiple fences for them to nest in between. I don't have measurements for any of this. I was just using scrap and cutting pieces as I go. You can see nothing's really identical in size. It's more so I just have these 2 pieces of plywood held in place with those angled pieces of 2x4. I cut the same angle on these little slats of plywood, and I'm just nesting this leg in there. The problem with this is cutting these grooves gets really dangerous no matter what tool you're using because it's round, so it's really hard to clamp carefully. It's also angled, so it's really hard to clamp an angled piece and keep it at the angle you need it to be at so it's accurate. So like I said, I'm basically just making this cradle, which is going to keep the entire thing snug on all 4 sides. You can see, like I said, I'm going through it very quickly, but it's basically, like I said, just a couple pieces of plywood held in place there. I could slide the legs in the bottom, line everything up, and I'm going to put one more clamp on this front here just to keep that leg in place. Then I could slide it through. Now this is the second piece of furniture, so it's a little bit bigger, so I decided to make a 2-inch base. The cabinet I'm working on right now is only 1 inch, so I'm switching back to the cabinet I'm working on now. You can see that my open mortise is only 1 inch, and it fits right on that pine that I cut in an earlier clip. So that's what that looks like. So then once I had that done, I could cut this pine down. This is all based on the dimensions of the drawings. She wanted the legs 2 inches in around the entire perimeter. So this is a borderline a little bit of a wobbly cabinet, but that is what she wanted. So I just cut a decorative 45 on there, and then I'm going to put some dados on those slats to receive some bracing on the bottom, and once it's all glued together, this is going to be really strong. You can see I'm just using a stop on the table saw in order to cut those. I could set them up based on my lines there, and then I could add the legs. There was more tear out on that first way I cut them as well, but this is going to be painted, so it's a little bit of a pain to patch stuff, but it's very doable. Now, if I do come around to getting those plans done and uploaded, you will notice I made the bottom wider. I thought that this was, for design, was a little too skinny. Like I said, that's what she wanted. But if you're building this and following the video, I make it about 3 or 4 inches wider so that base is a little more solid than in this video. In the plans, at least. You could really make it as skinny as you want. Just be aware of the fact that it's going to teeter-totter a little bit. The skinnier, the closer the legs are together. And then I could just glue everything together, and then the next day I could take it apart and plop it in place. I'm just going to attach this with screws. I don't always love working with plywood, but one of the nice things about working with plywood is it is fairly dimensionally stable. So I have no problem screwing this directly into the plywood without really worrying about seasonal movement on that bottom. So it came time to make the door, and this didn't glue up perfectly square, which is somewhat of a common problem. And I think I was about a 1/16 of an inch off, and wanted to make the door with a reveal of 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is make the door as wide as my biggest dimension, and I'm going to have to plane off one side so everything aligns. So if you want to pause that and kind of look at that math, but basically I'm putting a hardwood frame around this as well, very similar to how I did the top. Like I said, you can use glue-on edge banding for this if you don't want to go through the time of making all these grooves and splines. I just find it to be a more durable end result. So I cut out that rough shape for the door. I added that groove on the entire perimeter, and then same process. Take some plywood. This is just 1 inch wide. I'm going to add that same groove, and then I could go through and attach all of it. Now she wanted a flat panel door, and another reason I'm adding a hardwood frame is because everyone thinks plywood's really flat. It really isn't. And this is somewhat of a larger door. I was a little nervous about because this is an inset door, so if it bows and bends, you are going to notice it pretty quickly. So this hardwood hardwood frame will also help keep this plywood flat. It's going to have less of a tendency to bow with that frame. And then same process for adding this. I'm just working my way around the perimeter. I started with one side. I cut a miter to kind of make sure the miters are going to work on the edges. And then once I had all my pieces, I could glue this together. I'm using my table saw for this because I wanted this stuff to stay pretty flat. This glue is going to stain the table saw a little bit, but I'm really in the need of cleaning it anyway. Sand it the next day. Come in and put some holes in here because she wanted adjustable shelves. I just do that with pegboard, and pretty simple process for that. And then once I had the pegboard holes, she wanted 3 shelves that she wanted them spaced a particular way in there. So even though they're adjustable, she wanted them spaced a particular way, and then I could just go through and cut those 3 shelves. That's basically what the spacing is going to be. And then once the door is dry, you could see I have to fit it. So what's going on is it fits vertically, it's perfect height, so I made it the height I needed it to be, but you can see it touches that top corner, but there's a space at the bottom. So basically I have to taper a line about 1/16 of an inch. So you can see I drew a line on that bottom corner. It tapers to the top, so there's no line at all. And then just with a plane, I slowly remove material until it fits in that door frame. There's about 3 tries to get this right with the plane, but now you could see with it in the frame, that reveal is going to be just about perfect. So that's a simple way to deal with inset doors in a frame that's not perfectly square. Now, if you're talking about your cabinet being glued up more severely out of square, there is going to be more tweaking, and if it's really severely out of square at some point, you are going to notice that it isn't a perfect shape. So then inset hinges are going to go in here. I like European style hinges. These are Blum hinges, soft close. I could just attach them. I have a little jig to attach them. I'm going to space it with some pennies so it's spaced off the top and bottom just about perfectly, and then attach the door. So those won't come with instructions, but you can find them online. The offset for all of them is going to be a little bit different. And then that is what that looks like. I don't show it, but I edge band the plywood shelves with that glue on edge banding, not hardwood edge banding. That's basically what it looks like. I sand it with 80 grit sandpaper throughout the process, and then I'm going to put on a coat of primer. The primer is going to raise the grain. I prefer to patch and sand the raised grain in one step versus doing multiple steps. So I put a coat of primer on there. It's going to show all the hairline cracks and little things that pop up. With plywood, you'll get a lot of that because the end of the veneer, especially since I had some less plywood kicked around the shop for a while, it just gets dinged and nicked. So I'll put some patch on there, sand it all at once, and then this is going to be painted black. I haven't painted something black in a while. While it's nice to paint something black and the door reveals are a little bit more hidden, I forgot how much it picks up every single scrap of dust. You can see my fingerprints all over this stuff. So I think I might actually have to put a clear on here. But this is basically what it looks like. The problem with the paint is the paint on this plywood, I had a very large, this was a tiny void, but there's a big void in the plywood, and as I put more and more layers of paint on and the wood absorbed more moisture from the paint, it started to bubble and ripple. So that at this point is going to have to be repaired. I'm probably going to have to fill that with epoxy and do multiple more coats to fix it. But that's basically what this looks like. Very simple cabinet.